I'm here with Judy at the Argyle Township Courthouse and Jail. Now I have to say, being here gives me a kind of a creepy feeling. I get that when I go to courthouses, jails, and churches. So perhaps you'd like to tell me a little bit about the history of this place and how it actually came about?
Yes, well, first of all, I'd like to say welcome to the Argyle Township Courthouse and Jail, not Gaol as many people think that it's called. So this building is actually the oldest courthouse and jail in Canada, the oldest standing courthouse and jail. It was built around 1801 to 1805, and it served as a courthouse until 1944. In 1945 until 1976, the municipality of Argyle had their offices in this building, and then the building after that, they had moved just down the street at their new building, and so the building remained vacant. There were some people in the community that were quite interested in the building. They saw buildings similar to, for example, the Eastern Seaboard in the US, and it was different from other buildings in this area. So they saw that it was becoming quite dilapidated, and they just thought that would be a shame to lose this building. So they went to the municipality, who still owned the building, and they said, can we do something about the building? The municipality at the time didn't really have a lot of resources or necessarily maybe interest to do a whole lot, and they said, well, we're supportive of you if you want to take this on. So they rolled up their sleeves and off they went. And they sought, they did a lot of work, and they sought a lot of funding, and eventually they were successful. Maybe not the first time, but they were passionate about it, and they did get through. And as a result, the building was restored to the former courthouse and jail that you see today, and reopened as a museum. And it was restored in '82, reopened in '83 as a museum. The reason I want to talk a little bit about that is that this is not a traditional museum. It's not a collecting museum like most museums. So when people do come here, some people don't want to go through with an interpretive tour guide. They just say, I just want to look around. And we realize that it can be intimidating to actually, or maybe some people just don't want that interaction going through. But if you do go through, you might think it's interesting, or you might think it's kind of neat, but you won't get the full experience without going through with a tour guide, because the tour guide really makes everything come to life with the stories of the building. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that as a result of it not planning on being a museum, everything was removed. All the movable fixtures were removed from the building. So when it was restored, there's not that many of the movable items that remained here. The artifact is the museum itself, and through the tour guide will point out things that are original to the building. The other thing that I want to say is that at that time that we opened as a museum, we didn't have a historical society yet. There were a lot of documents left in this building after the municipal office left. So there was a historian that started working here. I believe it was when the museum first opened in '83. I believe he died in 1985. His name was Oscar Noss, and he was passionate about local history and preserving that. And so it became a place that people knew that they could bring things as well. So there was a lot of documents here, and people started to bring things here too. So the museum is actually owned by the municipality of Argyle, but the Historical Society was formed in 1989 to take care of all of the documents, to take care of the museum for the municipality. So there is a very interesting relationship between the municipality of Argyle and the Historical Society. In 1989, when they were formed, they started creating a publication called The Argus. And The Argus is something that we've been publishing 4 times a year ever since 1989. As a result, we maintain a membership of about 450 to 500 members right through across Canada and the US, all with a connection to this region.
So this would have, you said it was constructed in the early part of the 19th century, so the architecture would have been
Yes.
Georgian, right?
Yes.
Now, what kind of cases would have been tried here? I would imagine that would it be like a tort court, a civil court?
So the first court that was held here was General Sessions of the Peace. That was the first type of court that was held here in the early 1800s. And then there was the Supreme Court, and then the last court would have been Magistrates' Court.
So the Supreme Court at that time, it would have had capital cases.
Yes, it was a circuit court. So they came to this area twice a year.
So if someone was charged with a capital crime, they'd be held in
Yes.
the jail underneath.
Yes.
And you would have to wait until the judge,
your day in court.
your day in court.
Yes.
That must have been one long wait for somebody in there.
It could have been, but it was all sorts of court cases. So like we have some funny little cases, maybe not funny,
Do
but
tell.
But like boys throwing rocks at a house and being grabbed by the collar and march to the court and then being thrown in the jail and waiting their day in court. Now, I don't know how long they ended up waiting there, but I can just imagine as you'll hear a little bit later, the conditions are not the best here. They certainly would not have been the best for prisoners. And my understanding is what happened with that case when they did get their day in court. I don't know how long they stayed, but they said, you are guilty, but it's time. But you served your time already. So sitting in the dark, cold conditions in the jail, they felt that those boys had probably learned their lesson.
I'm here with Carly, and she's going to tell us what her title is here.
Hi, Sandy. As you said, I'm Carly, and I am the Museum Program Coordinator here at the Argyle Township, Courthouse, and Jail. So I've been working here since last summer. I'm a student who just comes in, and I was actually here about 12 years ago in high school as well. So the courthouse is near and dear to my heart.
And I see we're in a judge's chamber, so you can see the law books and the portraits. So what kind of cases would the judges have adjudicated here?
So there was different levels of court throughout the years. The first one would have been the Court of General Sessions. So that was more along the lines of like what we would consider town hall meetings. So it would be locals coming in to discuss like maybe logistical issues in the community, like we need a new road, or the local shipyard is working too late and it's disturbing my children, like those types of just like community issues. So that was generally what they dealt with in the early 1800s. And then once Tusket was added into the circuit court, there was a bit of a change there for the Supreme Court coming in, where we would actually deal with a bit more serious, higher level cases. So we had like the typical petty crimes that were dealt with, where we'd have people in the prison downstairs, and we'd also have even like issues of like libel and like major crimes like murder. It was quite rare here in Tusket, but there were a few incidences of murder or serious assault that were dealt with. It is very hard to come by some of the information because of the nature of the circuit court. So they would typically have the judge, 2 court recorders, a sheriff, a bailiff, and sometimes more than one judge, and all of the lawyers traveling in the circuit. So a dozen people traveling the circuit court here in Nova Scotia. They would come with all their paperwork, and then they would leave with all of it. So when we started developing the museum in the 80s, there was really that kind of lack of information, but through help of like the Nova Scotia archives and finding municipal information, we've been able to piece together a bit more of the history, but it wasn't just readily available for us. Like all these law books here, they were left behind by the municipality in the 70s. So they are not rare books, like you could find these in some law libraries or at any big archives, but they are original to the building, so that's always really nice. And I have gone through all of them to do an inventory last year. I think the oldest one I found was from like 1920. They are very delicate, very cool parts of the history of this building. So the room that we are currently in, the judge's chambers, was really just a stand-away kind of office for the judge. Like he would not have stayed in this room. It was just for in between the actual court cases themselves. There is kind of a bit of a history on where the judges would stay. So in the early days of the circuit, there wasn't a hotel in Tuscott. So they would stay with wealthy families along the Tuscott River. There's lots of beautiful older houses that were for all the local wealthy business owners. So typically the judges would actually end up staying with local families, which brings into question how like unbiased they could ever be when they became friends with some of the locals. One of my favorite judges, Thomas Chandler Halliburton, or T.C. Halliburton, he was one of the most frequent judges that came here in the early 1900s. So he came on and off to Tuscott for about 10 years, and he loved it here. He loved the people. He is not well known as a judge because he was not, he didn't have the best judicial writings. I know, that's weird to say. So when you are talking about common law, anything that a judge writes in a decision becomes part of law. Like common law is constantly growing with new judgments.
You're talking about precedents.
Yeah, setting precedents. Yeah, so with common law, anything that a judge writes becomes part of the law. So he would write jokes into his decisions. So he's well known as like a humorist, as an author, which he built into his judgments, which then became kind of part of the common law of Nova Scotia. So he was not well liked in the judicial world because he kept doing these things which were highly unprofessional. But I think that might be part of the reason that he loved like the charm of Tuscott, was that he grew to love the people. He really loved the local Acadian population. Like he was a big proponent for Acadians and their rights, especially here where common law was practiced, all in English, and oftentimes the people who were in prison here were Acadian, they were French. Sometimes they couldn't even speak English, so they'd be tried in not their language. T.C. Halliburton did not speak French, but he did like Acadians. But none of the judges that practiced here would have practiced in French. None of them would have, I can't say none of them would have known French because I didn't look into every single one of them, but it would have all been exclusively in English, which kind of is a disservice to the population that they had to serve here.
It does. How can you defend yourself if you
don't
can't
understand
speak the language?
Exactly. So those poor prisoners kind of were set up to fail a little bit. And as Judy has mentioned too, like even coming into the courtroom, there's a likelihood they would have been downstairs in the prison for months at a time. And the prison is tiny, it's dark, it's cold. In the summertime, it's even cold. It's never hot down there. So they become accustomed to being in the dark, the cold for months. They come upstairs into the courtroom after maybe not having seen family or friends for months. And the back would have been full because Tuscott didn't have that much going on. So it was kind of like coming to see like a soap opera. Well, it was like the local entertainment was coming to the court.
I get this image of this person being taken up from the cells like a prisoner of Monte Cristo with long hair and a beard, clothes all dirty, and being dragged up here, right? What are you charged with? I threw rocks when I was a kid, right? Take you up here, right?
Yeah, so that is the issue. Some of these people would be coming up not having been in the light for months on end. So you can imagine they were hardly in their best state. And they would come up in front of all of their neighbors, all of their family, all of their friends, and these very educated people from the city that did not speak their language, did not have a ton of sympathy for their situation, be plopped into the prisoner's docket, which is extremely uncomfortable. So anytime a tourist comes, I like to get them just to have a moment's seat in that spot, just to see what it was like.
Now, that was done deliberately to make the prisoner uncomfortable, yes?
Yes, yeah. So
What would be the purpose of that?
just because they didn't have any rights as people, like they were treated as lesser-thans.
Yeah.
So the actual bench itself kind of is on an angle, so you're forced to sit further back. You can try to sit on the end, but it won't last for long, especially on a court day where they could have been in that courtroom from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So they didn't really have, like eventually you ended up sitting back into that molding that just pressed right into your back. And there was the stove directly behind them, so they would be sweating up a storm, regardless of guilt. They were sweaty, they were tired, and they were very uncomfortable.
It seems an unnecessary cruelty.
Yes, it certainly was.
You say that this is one of the more comfortable cells? Really?
It really is. Why don't you go have a look and see for yourself?
All right. Doesn't look very comfortable to me. Table here, straw mattresses. Hey, what are you doing? I gotta go to the archives. Let me out of here. Hey, anybody there? Let me out. Well, I'm finally out of the jail. I won't say how long I was there, but it was a long time. And here I am talking to Phil. And could you please tell us exactly your title and what do you do here in the archives?
Well, I'm a municipal research assistant at the archives, so it's a couple things I do. One of the things I do is I bust people like you out of jail.
Really?
You get a light sentence, yeah.
You were late?
I know, so I'm glad you're able to get out of there because there's just no heat in that building. But besides that, I mean, actually what I do is I do genealogical research for people when they come in. The archives has all kinds of family histories, family Bibles. We do municipal research. We've got records going back for this area back to the 1790s. And, you know, that kind of stuff. People are coming in here sometimes looking for the history of their homes. As you drive around here, you've noticed, well, Nova Scotia, a character home really is a character home, right? So in this area, they've all been cataloged. We know who built it. We know when it was built, who's owned it, if it's still standing when they did that. So we help people with that sort of stuff. We have church records, some of which we can dig into, and some of which we can't because it's still protected information. So we make Google. That's pretty much what we do. You know, we give it its roots, and I help to facilitate that.
I understand that because, you know, Nova Scotia, a lot of the land was land grants at one time. And then when children would marry, they'd subdivide it. So some of it, they would come in to research, let's say, in terms of land grants or who it was and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Who got the land, where it went to. Sometimes, you know, the interest, well, this entire area has a very interesting history, of course, but, you know, first Acadian, the Acadians were expelled, in come the planters. And then there's the Loyalists following the planters.
Well, just a second, you know, explain to our audience what a planter is, and just in case they don't know what
besides the peanut.
Yes, besides the peanuts.
Okay, and that's
There's not this little guy with a top hat, right?
Well, yeah, and he never made it.
Yeah, because most people watching may not understand who the planters were.
When the British kicked the Acadians out through the expulsion, and I must apologize, I'm an English guy, so I don't have all the Acadian terminology, so not to do disservice to the history in the past and that sort of thing. But at any rate, the British needed to have British subjects here to hold the land, right? Boots on the ground. So they replaced the Acadians with Brits. Loyalists, well, they're pre-loyalist folks from New England and England, and they came in, and in some cases the farms were there ready to go. In other cases, all that had been burnt, but the land had been cleared, the land was ready to go. So the planters were called planters because they just planted and kept right on going, and they turned the French place to the British place.
It's interesting. So really, if an descendant from the Acadians had come and claimed it, and then you had the planters, who would own it?
Well, you know, who is it that makes the rules? What's that?
The winners.
That's right. He who wins makes the rules. And it was definitely the he who won back in the day. So British rules. And so when the Acadians came back, after a time, they were allowed to come back. They said, okay, not exactly we're sorry, but you can come back and have some land. So the land that they got was actually either side of Yarmouth and this area. So we down to Wedgeport, the Pubnicos, that sort of thing. We've got an East Pubnico and a West Pubnico. In fact, as you drove in, maybe you noticed that there are a number of Pubnicos. West, Middle West, Upper Middle West. Nobody knows who lives where. So East Pubnico was settled by the English. West Pubnico went back to the Acadians. And then up Clare, that was another area that was given back to the Acadians. So they went, a lot of them went to Louisiana, very famously Cajuns. A number went back to Europe. Quite a few went into hiding and just kind of disappeared into the bushes, right? And then in time they came back. But their land, such as it was no longer theirs. And they needed to go from being farmers to fishermen. Very resilient, very thinking on their feet kind of folk, for sure.
Could you imagine coming back and they give you this land and you look and there used to be your old house and it's got somebody else in it?
Well, not just that, but there's also the tragedy of the event. Families were pulled apart. All the records were destroyed. They kept some of the records in Grand Pre for that area. Our oldest records here go back to 1790, and they are not French, right? So there is a double tragedy for sure.
So you could come here and research your family, your genealogy, your land grants.
That's right.
Anything else?
Well, as I said, all the municipal records are housed here too. I don't know if you heard through an earlier interview, but there's a very unique relationship between the municipality and the Historical Society here. So this building belongs to the Historical Society. This was an old church at one point, obviously, and then when it was purchased, much of this that you see in this room, and we have a vault with chock-a-block, was over in that building where you just were in the courthouse. We needed more space. They needed more space, so they purchased the church, and then they went to town on the church. And so it was raised. The steeple was completely off the building. They put in this concrete floor. They put in the windows. It's insulated, all this brought up to modern standards. And then they built a fireproof vault out the back. And so the society owns that. The records belong to the municipality. It's a very unique relationship, and it seems to work extremely well. That building belongs to the municipality because it was a courthouse, and then it was town hall, and that sort of thing. Yet we run the museum and we run the gift shop. So the municipal records as well. I get tax questions from back in the 50s and 60s and stuff like that. We have those records. School board questions, we have those records.
So the funding is municipal, provincial, or is it nonprofit?
All of the above. We have some work to do to this building, but we've got a significant fundraising campaign going to start on the courthouse. In 2 years, it's our 35th anniversary, and it's also the Congrès Mondial for the Acadian World Congress, which will be held here. So in the next 2 years, we need to replace a roof, windows, and paint. And we need some paint too.
That's going to cost a bit of money, isn't it?
It's going to cost a couple of dollars.
Yeah.
So we'll be taking collections before you leave, if you don't mind. You got to pay your fine.
Hey, pal, I just was at debtor's prison. Come on. You're not going to get much out of me. Come on.
Well, every little bit helps.